Vivien Sterling had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts, fired executives twice her age, and built a company from a garage to a downtown tower. But right now, sitting alone at a table for two after her blind date had just fled with a fake emergency call, she felt more exposed than she had in years. The half-empty wineglass across from her still held his lipstick-free rim. The waiter glanced over with pity she didn't ask for. She should leave. She should grab her coat and walk out like none of this happened, but her legs wouldn't move. And for the first time in a decade, Vivien Sterling, CEO of Sterling Design, had no idea what her next move should be. That's when a small hand appeared at the edge of her table, holding a crayon drawing of a woman with broken wings, and behind that hand stood a man carrying a sleeping child's backpack who looked at her without pity, without agenda, and said quietly, "If you're free, sit here." Rosie doesn't share her drawings with just anyone. Cole Brennan had noticed her the moment she walked in, not because of the silk blouse that probably cost more than his truck payment, or the way her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with the confidence of someone who owned whatever room she entered. He noticed her because of what happened to her face when she sat down across from the man already waiting at the corner table. Something flickered behind her eyes. A quick calculation. A disappointment swallowed before it could reach her lips. He recognized that look. He had worn it himself for the last 2 years of his marriage, back when he still believed things could be fixed if he just tried hard enough. Rosie tugged at his sleeve, pulling his attention back to the coloring page spread between their plates. His daughter was working on a picture of a butterfly, though she had chosen colors no butterfly had ever worn. Purple wings with orange spots, and a body the color of lime sherbet. She was humming something under her breath. A song from a cartoon he pretended not to know by heart. 7 years old. And already, she had developed the habit of narrating her own life through melody, a trait she had inherited from her mother. Sometimes it made Colt smile. Other times it made him grip the steering wheel a little tighter on the drive home from school, blinking at the windshield until his vision cleared. The man at the corner table was still talking. Colt could hear fragments of the conversation drifting over words like portfolio and quarterly returns and strategic diversification. The woman across from him, the one with the silk blouse and the disappointed eyes, was nodding at all the right moments, her smile perfectly calibrated. But her hand kept reaching for her water glass, her fingers tracing circles around the rim, and every few minutes, her gaze would slip toward the window, like a bird looking for an open cage door. Colt knew that gesture, too. It was the body's way of seeking escape when the mind was too polite to admit it wanted to run. Rosie looked up from her coloring her crayon, pausing mid-stroke. She tilted her head in that way. She had studying something only she could see. "Daddy," she whispered loud enough that it wasn't really a whisper at all. "That lady looks sad." Colt glanced at the corner table, then back at his daughter. "Maybe she's just thinking," he said, keeping his voice low. Rosie shook her head with the certainty only children possess. "No, sad and thinking are different colors. She's the sad one." She went back to her butterfly, adding a streak of red to the wings that hadn't been there before. The man at the corner table pulled out his phone, frowning at the screen. He said something to the woman, an apology wrapped in self-importance, then stood and walked toward the exit with the phone pressed to his ear. The woman watched him go, her shoulders dropping an inch when the door closed behind him. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful. Then the man returned, pocketing his phone with a shake of his head, and her shoulders climbed right back up to where they had been. Colt found himself wondering what it would take to make those shoulders stay down. Then he caught himself wondering and looked away, embarrassed by his own thoughts. He was here for chicken fingers and quality time with his daughter, not to psychoanalyze strangers. The waiter brought their food, arranging the plates with practiced efficiency. Rosie immediately began separating her fries into categories based on size of ritual she had performed at every restaurant since she was 4 years old. Colt cut his burger in half, watching from the corner of his eye as the man at the corner table launched into another monologue. The woman was nodding again, but something had changed in her posture. She looked tired now, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. The man gestured broadly, nearly knocking over his wine glass, and didn't seem to notice the way she flinched back from his flailing hand. Rosie had abandoned her fry sorting to work on a new drawing. This one was different from her usual subjects. No butterflies or cats or houses with smoke curling from the chimney. She was drawing a person, a woman with long hair and a dress that flowed off the edge of the paper. But something was wrong with the picture. The woman had wings, large, sweeping wings that curved behind her shoulders, except the wings were bent at strange angles, broken in places that made them look heavy instead of light. Colt watched his daughter add careful shading to the damaged feathers, her face serious with concentration. "Who's that?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Rosie didn't look up from her work. "The sad lady," she said, as if this were obvious. "She has broken wings. That's why she can't fly away." Colt felt something twist in his chest, a familiar ache that came whenever his daughter saw too clearly the things adults tried to hide. He wanted to tell her that people don't have wings, that the woman at the corner table was just a stranger having a bad date, that sometimes sadness was temporary and didn't mean anything at all. But Rosie was already adding more details to the drawing. Small stars scattered around the broken-winged woman like a promise of light in the darkness. And Colt couldn't bring himself to take that away from her. The man's phone rang again, and this time, when he answered, his entire demeanor changed. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking his chair backward, and began speaking in rapid tones about something urgent, something that clearly couldn't wait. The woman at the table watched him pace toward the entrance phone pressed to his ear, and Colt saw the exact moment she realized he wasn't coming back. It wasn't relief on her face. Not exactly. It was something closer to resignation, the expression of someone who had expected disappointment and received exactly that. The man pushed through the door without looking back, still talking into his phone, and the woman was left sitting alone at a table set for two. She didn't move for a long moment. Her hand stayed folded on the table. Her posture remained perfect, but something in her face had crumbled. The waiter approached with a question on his lips, and she shook her head without meeting his eyes. He retreated, leaving her stranded in the middle of the restaurant, like a ship that had lost its anchor. Other diners glanced her way, quick looks filled with curiosity or pity, and each glance seemed to make her smaller. Colt knew that feeling too. The weight of being seen at your lowest moment. After his wife's funeral, he had felt those looks everywhere he went, the entire town, watching him try to hold together pieces that no longer fit. Rosie had finished her drawing. She held it up to examine her work, tilting her head left and right, then nodded with satisfaction. Before Colt could say anything, before he could even register what was happening, his daughter slid out of her chair and walked directly toward the corner table. She moved with the fearless purpose of a child who had not yet learned that strangers were supposed to remain strange. Colt half rose from his seat, a warning forming on his lips, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the determined set of Rosie's shoulders, or the way the woman at the corner table had gone perfectly still as she watched this small person approach. Maybe it was something else entirely, something Colt couldn't name, but felt humming in his chest like a second heartbeat. Rosie stopped at the edge of the woman's table and held out the drawing. "This is for you," she said, her voice clear and bright in the quiet restaurant. "I made it because you look like you needed wings." The woman stared at the paper, at the broken-winged figures surrounded by stars, and for a moment, her face went completely blank. Then, something cracked behind her eyes, a flash of emotion so raw that Colt felt it from across the room. She took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, her perfectly manicured fingers careful not to smudge the crayon lines. Colt reached the table just as the woman looked up from the picture. "I'm sorry," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She does this sometimes. She sees someone and decides they need something. And I know it's probably weird, a stranger's kid just walking up to you like this." He was rambling. He knew he was rambling. But the woman was looking at him now with those dark eyes, and he couldn't seem to find the off switch for his mouth. Rosie tugged at his sleeve, utterly unconcerned with adult anxieties. "Daddy, she's crying," she announced. And Colt realized with a start that his daughter was right. A single tear had escaped down the woman's cheek, cutting a trail through foundation that probably cost more than his electric bill. The woman laughed, then a sound that was half sob and half genuine amusement. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup in a way that somehow made her look more human. "I'm not crying," she said, though the evidence was running down her chin. "I just have something in my eye." "Several somethings, apparently." Rosie nodded solemnly. "My daddy cries sometimes, too. He thinks I don't know, but I do. I pretend I don't, so he doesn't feel bad." Colt felt his face flush hot. His daughter had just exposed his deepest secret to a complete stranger with the casual brutality only a 7-year-old could manage. But the woman wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. She was looking at him like he had suddenly become real. Like the tears of a single father somehow mattered more than all the business cards in her purse. "If you're free," Colt heard himself say the words coming from somewhere he hadn't authorized. "Sit here with us? I mean, Rosie doesn't share her drawings with just anyone, so you must be special." He gestured toward their table, toward the half-eaten burger and the categorized fries and the crayons scattered like confetti. It wasn't an elegant invitation. It wasn't smooth or charming or any of the things a man was supposed to be when talking to a beautiful woman. But the woman looked at the drawing in her hands, at the broken winged figure her daughter had created just for her, and something in her face shifted, like clouds parting after a storm. She stood gathering her coat and her purse and the remnants of her dignity. "I'm Vivien," she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was probably automatic for someone in her position. Colt shook it, noting the firmness of her grip, the calluses hidden beneath her smooth palm. "Colt? And you've already met Rosie?" His daughter was already heading back to their table, dragging a chair from a nearby setting without asking permission. "Come on," Rosie called over her shoulder. "Your food is getting cold." "Well, your new food. The other man's food is probably cold already because he left it." Vivien laughed again, and this time there was no sob hiding in the sound. She followed Rosie to the table, and Colt followed her, wondering what exactly he had just invited into his carefully constructed life. Vivien Sterling was not the kind of woman who sat at tables with strange men and their children. She was the kind of woman who scheduled her dinners 3 weeks in advance, who vetted potential dates through mutual connections and background research, who maintained control over every aspect of her life. Because control was the only thing that had never let her down. But here she was, sliding into a booth seat, still warm from a 7-year-old's body heat, staring at a basket of chicken fingers like they held the answers to questions she hadn't known she was asking. The girl Rosie had already resumed her fry sorting with the intensity of a surgeon, occasionally glancing up at Vivien with open curiosity. "So?" Colt said, settling into the seat across from her terrible date. Vivien snorted an inelegant sound she would never have made in a boardroom. "Is it that obvious?" He shrugged a motion that drew her attention to the breadth of his shoulders. The way his flannel shirt strained slightly at the seams, working hands, she noticed calloused fingers. Nothing like the soft-palmed men who usually pursued her. "Let's just say I've sat across from a few people who would rather be anywhere else. You get good at spotting it." There was no judgment in his voice, just observation. Vivien found herself wondering what else he had learned to spot, and whatever life had led him to this booth. Rosie looked up from her fries. "The man who left was boring," she declared. "He talked too much about numbers. Numbers are boring unless they're about cookies. Like, if you have 5 cookies and you eat 3? That's interesting because now you have 2 cookies left." But he was talking about numbers that don't have cookies attached. Vivien felt a laugh building in her chest. The first real laugh she had experienced in weeks. "You know what? You're absolutely right. His numbers had no cookies attached at all." Rosie beamed at her with the satisfaction of someone whose worldview had been validated by an adult. Colt was watching them both, with an expression. Vivien couldn't quite read something between amusement and wonder. The waiter appeared and Vivien realized she had forgotten to eat during her previous dinner performance. She ordered a glass of wine, and the first thing her finger landed on in the menu, too distracted to care what it was. When the waiter left, she found herself studying the drawing Rosie had given her, the broken-winged woman surrounded by stars. "Why did you draw this?" she asked, surprised by how much she wanted to know the answer. Rosie considered the question with the gravity of a philosopher because you looked like you needed to fly somewhere, but you couldn't. "So, I drew stars around you instead. That way, You'd have something pretty to look at while your wings get better." Colt cleared his throat softly. "Rosie sees things differently than most people," he said. "She always has. Her mother used to say she was born with her heart on the outside." The past tense hung in the air between them. A door left slightly open. Vivien recognized grief when she saw it. She had worn it herself in various forms over the years, but she didn't push, didn't ask the questions that were forming in her mind. Instead, she looked at the drawing again and said, "It's beautiful. Thank you, Rosie." The girl smiled and went back to her fries, her mission apparently complete. They talked about nothing important at first. The weather, which had been unseasonably warm for early spring, the restaurant, which Colt said had the best pancakes in the city if you came on Sunday mornings, Rose's school, which was hosting a science fair next month that she was determined to win, with a project about which colors birds liked best. Small talk, the kind Vivien usually despised. But somehow, it felt different here. There was no agenda beneath the words, no negotiation happening under the surface, just two people filling silence with ordinary sounds, while a child organized her dinner by size. Vivien found herself asking about his work, and Colt's face changed when he answered. He was a carpenter, he explained. Custom furniture mostly. He had his own workshop in a converted garage behind his house. Nothing fancy, but it was his. The way he talked about wood, about grain patterns and joinery, and the satisfaction of making something with his hands, reminded Vivien of how she used to talk about design before it became a business. Before every conversation about aesthetics turned into a conversation about profit margins. She mentioned that she worked in design too, keeping it vague. And Colt's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "What kind?" he asked. "Interior. Mostly commercial spaces." She didn't mention the 200 employees, or the downtown tower, or the multi-million-dollar contracts. For once, she just wanted to be someone who worked in design. Rosie had finished sorting her fries, and was now studying Vivien with the unnerving directness of children. "You know a lot about wood," she announced. "You looked at the table like you were reading it." Vivien blinked, caught off guard. She had been running her fingers along the tabletop without realizing it. A habit from years of evaluating materials. "I do know a little about wood," she admitted. "Your dad's work sounds amazing. Does he make things for you?" Rosie's face brightened. "He made me a dollhouse and a jewelry box. And this?" She held up her wrist, showing a delicate bracelet made of small wooden beads, each one carved with a tiny flower. "He makes the best things." Colt's ears had gone slightly red. "She's biased," he said, but Vivien could see the pride beneath his embarrassment. She reached out and gently touched the bracelet, turning Rosie's wrist to see the craftsmanship better. The carving was exquisite, each flower distinct, the wood polished to a soft glow. This wasn't amateur work. This was artistry. "These are beautiful," she said, and meant it. "The detail work, the finishing, this is professional quality, better than professional." Actually, Colt's blush deepened, but something in his posture shifted, straightened like a plant turning toward unexpected sunlight. Her phone buzzed in her purse, the third time since she had sat down. Vivien ignored it, then ignored it again, when it buzzed twice more in quick succession. Colt noticed she could tell, but he didn't mention it, didn't ask who was calling or why she wasn't answering. Most men would have seen the buzzing phone as an opportunity to demonstrate how understanding they were about her busy life. But Colt just kept talking about the bookshelf he was building for a client, about how Rosie liked to help him sand the edges, because she said it felt like petting a wooden cat. And for reasons she couldn't explain, Vivien found herself flipping her phone face down and pushing it deeper into her purse, burying it beneath her wallet and her keys and her carefully maintained control. The conversation turned to why Vivien hated blind dates, and she found herself being honest in a way she rarely was with strangers. "Everyone has an angle," she said. "They want something from me, or they want to be something to me, or they want to tell people they had dinner with me. Nobody ever just wants to have dinner." Colt nodded slowly like he understood more than her words were saying. "Rose's mother was like that," he said quietly. "Not the angles part, but the tiredness. She used to say that being seen was exhausting when everyone only saw what they wanted to see. Past tense again, the door opening a little wider. Rosie had stopped eating and was watching them both with serious eyes. "Mommy's in heaven." She said the words, matter of fact, in the way only a child who had learned grief early could manage. "She got sick, and the doctors couldn't fix her. But Daddy says she's watching us from somewhere pretty." Vivien felt her throat tighten. "I'm sure she is." She managed, and something passed between her and Colt. A recognition of wounds that hadn't fully healed and might never fully heal. He had lost his wife. He was raising this extraordinary child alone. And here he was inviting a crying stranger to share his table like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I should tell you something," Vivien heard herself say, though she hadn't planned to say anything at all. "I'm not just in design. I run a company, a fairly large one." She waited for the shift, the recalculation behind his eyes, the sudden interest that always appeared when people learned who she was. But Colt just nodded, taking a sip of his water. "That must be hard," he said. "Running something that big. Lots of people depending on you." Not impressive, not intimidating, not an opportunity to mention his own achievements or connections, just empathy for the weight she carried. Vivien felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen for so long she had forgotten it was there. The woman appeared from nowhere, cutting through the restaurant with the precision of a guided missile. Vivien recognized her immediately. Diane Prescott, CEO of a competing firm. A woman who had spent the last 3 years trying to poach Vivien's clients and undermine her reputation. Diane's smile was sharp enough to cut glass as she stopped at their table, her eyes scanning Colt and Rosie with barely concealed disdain. "Vivien Sterling! I almost didn't recognize you without your entourage. What a delightful little place you found." The word little dripped with condescension, a deliberate contrast to the upscale establishments where their professional circles usually intersected. Vivien felt her spine stiffen, years of corporate warfare kicking in like muscle memory. Diane? What a coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence at all, and they both knew it. Someone had seen her here. Someone had made a call. And now Diane was here to witness Vivien Sterling, sitting in a family restaurant with a man in flannel and a child with crayon-stained fingers. The gossip would be exquisite. The speculation, delicious. Vivien could already imagine the whispered conversations at industry events, the raised eyebrows and knowing looks. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her failed date and everything to do with being caught without her armor. Rosie had gone very still, her small body pressed against her father's side. She was watching Diane the way a rabbit watches a circling hawk, all instinct and frozen breath. Colt's hand moved to rest on his daughter's shoulder, a gesture so natural it was clearly practiced. He hadn't said anything yet, but Vivien could see him assessing the situation, reading the tension in the air with the same quiet attention he had shown earlier. Diane's gaze lingered on him, taking in the calloused hands and the worn flannel and the child's backpack slung over his chair. Her smile widened into something predatory. "I don't believe we've met," Diane said, extending her hand toward Colt with the air of someone bestowing a favor. "Diane Prescott. Prescott Interiors, and you are there." It was the trap laid bare. Whatever Colt said next would become ammunition, a story for Diane to tell and retell and embellish. The carpenter and the CEO, the single dad and the desperate businesswoman. Vivien opened her mouth to intervene, to deflect, to do any of the 100 things she had learned to do in situations like this. But Colt spoke first, and what he said was nothing she could have predicted. "Colt Brennan," he said, shaking Diane's hand with the same firm grip he had given Vivien. "This is my daughter, Rosie. We're having dinner with Vivien. Family dinner, actually." He said it simply, without emphasis. But the words landed like stones in still water. Family dinner. The implication rippled outward, reshaping everything Diane thought she knew about this scene. It wasn't a desperate CEO slumbing with strangers. It was a woman having dinner with people who mattered to her. The narrative Diane had been constructing collapsed before it could fully form. Diane's smile flickered, uncertainty creeping into its edges. Family dinner. How lovely. She was recalculating now. Vivien could see it, trying to figure out what she had walked into and how to extract herself without losing face. Rosie chose that moment to speak her small voice, cutting through the adult tension like a beam of light through fog. "You have mean eyes," she said to Diane, with the devastating honesty only children possessed. "My daddy says some people smile with their mouths, but not their eyes. You're doing that right now." The silence that followed was so complete, Vivien could hear her own heartbeat. Cole didn't apologize for his daughter's words. He didn't shush her or correct her or make excuses for her bluntness. He simply looked at Diane and said, "Kids see things pretty clearly. Would you like to join us? We could pull up another chair." The invitation was perfectly polite and absolutely sincere, which made it devastating. Diane couldn't accept without acknowledging she had come to gawk, and she couldn't refuse without proving Rosie right about her intentions. She stood frozen for a moment, her corporate mask slipping to reveal something smaller and meaner underneath. Then she laughed, a brittle sound that convinced no one. "Another time, perhaps. Enjoy your family dinner, Vivien." "Colt," "Rosie," she said each name like it was costing her something, then turned and walked away without looking back. Vivien realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, feeling something a knot in her chest that had been tied tight for years. Colt was watching her with quiet concern, not asking if she was okay, just present, ready to listen if she wanted to talk. Rosie had returned to her drawing, apparently unbothered by the encounter, though her hand had found Colt's under the table and hadn't let go. "Thank you," Vivien said, and the words felt inadequate for everything she was trying to express. "For what you said? Family dinner." Colt shrugged, that same easy motion that somehow conveyed more than words. "Wasn't a lie. You're sitting at our table. That's family enough for tonight." After Diane disappeared through the exit, Vivien sat in the aftermath of what had happened, trying to understand why she felt like crying again. Nobody had ever done that for her before. Not her board members, who measured every interaction in terms of strategic value, not the men she had dated, who either wilted in the face of professional conflict or tried to fight her battles with testosterone instead of intelligence. Certainly not her own family, who had long ago decided that Vivien's success made her immune to the need for protection. But this man, this stranger with his wood-stained fingers and his motherless daughter, had simply stated a truth and made it a shield. Family dinner. As if it were that easy. As if she belonged. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally, when the silence had stretched long enough to feel comfortable. "I'm used to handling people like Diane. It's part of the job." Cole tilted his head, considering her words. "I didn't do it because you couldn't handle her. I did it because you shouldn't have to. Not tonight. Not here." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Everyone deserves somewhere they don't have to be on guard. Somewhere they can just eat dinner and talk about nothing. Thought maybe tonight this could be that place for you." Vivien felt something give way inside her. A wall she hadn't known she was still building. Rosie looked up from her drawing, apparently satisfied that the interesting adult drama had concluded. "Daddy says being strong all the time is like holding a heavy rock. Eventually, your arms get tired, and you have to put it down." She said this with the certainty of someone repeating sacred wisdom. "He puts his rock down when he's in the workshop. Where do you put yours down, Miss Vivien?" The question hit Vivien somewhere deep and unexpected. She tried to remember the last time she had truly put down her rock, the last time she had existed somewhere without armor or agenda. The memory wouldn't come. "I don't know," she admitted, and the honesty of it surprised her. "I've been carrying it for so long, I've forgotten it's there most of the time." Colt nodded like this. Made perfect sense to him. "That's the tricky part. The rock gets lighter the longer you hold it. But it doesn't get smaller, just heavier in different ways." He wasn't looking at her with pity, or with the hunger to fix her that men sometimes showed. He was just looking at her, seeing her the way his daughter had seen the broken-winged woman who needed stars. "Sounds exhausting," he added. And somehow, those two words contained more understanding than all the therapy sessions and self-help books Vivien had accumulated over the years. "It is," she said. "It really is." And then, because the night had already broken every rule she had set for herself, she told him about it. Not all of it, not the details that would send him running for the familiar safety of normal people problems, But enough. The board meetings that lasted until midnight. The constant pressure to perform, to exceed, to prove that a woman could run a company as well as any man. The loneliness of being at the top, where every friendship was suspect, and every romance came with strings. The way she sometimes sat in her corner office after everyone had gone home and wondered if the view from the 20th floor was worth the climb. Cold listened without interrupting his attention, steady and complete. When she finally ran out of words, he didn't rush to fill the silence with advice or platitudes. He just sat with what she had shared, letting it exist between them without judgment. "That sounds really hard," he said finally. Not impressive or intimidating or any of the words people usually use to describe her life, just hard. An acknowledgement that achievement and suffering could occupy the same space that success didn't insulate anyone from pain. Vivien felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. She had cried enough for one night. Rosie had been drawing again, and now she pushed a new picture across the table toward Vivien. This one showed 3 figures, 2 tall and 1 small, standing together on what appeared to be a grassy hill. The tall figures were holding hands with the small one between them. Above their heads, Rosie had drawn a sun with a smiley face and clouds that looked like cotton candy. "This is us," Rosie explained. "Me and Daddy and you. I drew us being happy together." She said it like it was already true, like this one dinner had been enough to build a whole future on. Vivien looked at the drawing, at the simple joy of the 3 crayon figures, and felt something shift in her chest that she couldn't name. "I like it." She managed her voice rough around the edges. "I like it very much." Colt was watching her reaction with that same quiet attention. And when their eyes met, something passed between them that didn't need words. An understanding, a recognition, the acknowledgement that 2 broken people could sometimes make each other less broken. Not by fixing anything, but simply by being present. By sitting at the same table and sharing the same meal, and letting a 7-year-old draw pictures of a future that might never happen, but was beautiful to imagine anyway. The restaurant had grown quieter around them, the dinner crowd thinning as the hour grew late. Rosie had stopped drawing and was now fighting a losing battle against sleep, her head drooping toward Colt's shoulder before jerking upright, then drooping again. He watched her with the patient tenderness of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times before waiting for the moment when she would give in and let unconsciousness claim her. Vivien watched them both, this father and daughter, who had opened their table to a crying stranger and somehow given her back something she hadn't known she had lost. "We should probably get going," Colt said softly, his voice pitched low to avoid disturbing Rose's descent into sleep. "School night. Plus, someone is going to have crayon marks on her face if she falls asleep on those markers." He smiled as he said it, a real smile that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. Vivien found herself memorizing that smile, storing it somewhere safe, where she could take it out and look at it later, when the corner office felt too big and too empty. She nodded, reaching for her purse, already feeling the evening slipping away like sand through her fingers. Rosie had lost her battle with sleep, her small body curling into Colt's side with complete trust. He gathered her up with practiced ease, settling her against his shoulder, where she fit perfectly like a key in a lock. The child's backpack dangled from his other hand, its cartoon characters grinning at Vivien in the soft restaurant light. This was what it looked like. She realized this ordinary magic of carrying a sleeping child, of being someone's safe place to land. She had built empires and commanded boardrooms, but she had never had this, had never even known she wanted it until right now. "Thank you," Colt said, standing with Rosie cradled against him, "for sitting with us, for letting her share her drawings with you. She doesn't do that with just anyone you know. She's actually pretty shy with new people. But she took one look at you and decided you were someone who needed to be in her life." He said it matter-of-factly, like his daughter's judgment was simply a truth to be accepted. Vivien thought about the broken-winged woman and the 3 figures holding hands on a grassy hill. She thought about how it felt to be chosen by someone who had no reason to want anything from her. "Thank you for the invitation," she said, standing as well, "for seeing me sitting there and not just walking past." Colt adjusted Rosie's weight on his shoulder, his free hand reaching out to rest briefly on Vivien's arm. The touch was light, barely there, but she felt it like electricity through silk. "Hard not to see someone when they're that determined not to be seen," he said. "That's usually when they need to be seen the most." Vivien felt the truth of that statement settle into her bones, becoming part of her the way the best truths always did. They walked toward the exit together, Vivien gathering her coat and her purse and the 2 drawings Rosie had given her. The hostess smiled at them as they passed that knowing smile people gave to families leaving restaurants together. And Vivien didn't correct the assumption. Let the girl think what she wanted. Let the whole world think what it wanted. Tonight she had been part of something warm and real and human, and no amount of corporate gossip could take that away from her. At the door, Colt paused, shifting Rosie to reach for the handle. "I had a really nice time," he said, and the simplicity of the statement made it more meaningful than any elaborate compliment could have been. He wasn't trying to impress her or position himself for a follow-up. He was just telling her the truth, the way his daughter had told the truth all evening. Vivien felt the night ending, felt the real world, waiting outside with all its demands and complications. In a moment, she would walk out this door and become the CEO again, the woman with the corner office and the impossible standards, and the rock she carried everywhere without putting down. But not yet. Not quite yet. "Colt," she said, and he turned back to look at her patient and present Rosie's sleeping breath soft against his neck. Vivien reached into her purse and pulled out a card. Not her business card, not the heavy cream stock with the embossed logo and the impressive title. A different card when she had almost forgotten she had. Plain white, simple text, just her name and a phone number. Nothing else. "If Rosie wants to draw more pictures," she said, pressing the card into his free hand, "or if you need someone to talk to about wood grain and heavy rocks, I'd like that." She felt exposed, saying it more exposed than she had felt all evening, offering something real to someone who had no obligation to accept it. Colt looked at the card at the simple name printed there without titles or credentials, just Vivien. Just a woman asking to be remembered. He tucked the card into his shirt pocket close to his heart and smiled that real smile again. "I'd like that too," he said. "Rosie's going to be excited. She already asked if you could come see the dollhouse." Vivien laughed, surprised by how light the sound felt leaving her throat. "Tell her, I'd love to see the dollhouse and the jewelry box and anything else she wants to show me." Rosie steered slightly, mumbling something unintelligible, and Colt dropped his voice to a whisper. "I will. Good night, Vivien." "Good night, Colt." She watched him push through the door, watched him carry his sleeping daughter toward an ordinary car in an ordinary parking lot, watched him become a silhouette against the streetlights, and then disappear around a corner. She stood there for a moment, longer, holding her coat and her purse and 2 crayon drawings, feeling the evening settle around her like a blanket. The door swung closed, and she was alone again. But the alonianness felt different now, lighter, warmer, like she was carrying something precious instead of something heavy. The night air was cool against her face as she stepped outside. She should call her driver. She should check the 17 messages waiting on her phone. She should start preparing for tomorrow's meetings, and next week's presentations, and next month's quarterly review. She should put her rock back on her shoulders and start climbing again, because that was what Vivien Sterling did. That was who Vivien Sterling was. But instead, she just stood there looking up at the stars that were barely visible through the city lights, thinking about a little girl who drew broken wings and a quiet man who carved flowers into wooden beads. She didn't know if Cold would call. She didn't know if tonight was the beginning of something or just a beautiful anomaly, a single perfect evening that would fade into memory like all perfect things eventually did. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't trying to control the outcome. She wasn't strategizing or planning or protecting herself from potential disappointment. She was just standing in the cool night air, holding drawings that smelled like crayons, and childhood feeling something that might have been hope. Tomorrow she would be the CEO again. Tomorrow she would put on her armor and carry her rock and fight whatever battles needed fighting. But tonight, for a few hours, she had just been Vivien, a woman eating dinner with a carpenter and his daughter, a woman who had needed wings and been given stars instead, A woman who had been seen, really seen by people who wanted nothing from her except her company, and that she realized, as she finally started walking toward her car, was the most valuable thing anyone had given her in years. The card, with just her name on it, was already in Colt's pocket, close to his heart. The drawings were safe in her purse, pressed flat between her wallet and her phone. Somewhere across the city, a little girl was dreaming of dollhouses and grassy hills and three figures holding hands. And Vivien Sterling, CEO of Sterling Design, commander of 200 employees and negotiator of multi-million-dollar contracts, found herself smiling at nothing in particular as she walked alone through the quiet parking lot, lighter than she had been in years. The rock was still there. It would always be there. But tonight, just for tonight, she had found somewhere to put it down. And somehow, impossibly that was.